Hello again, YouTube. This is next installment of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This being Monday, we're going to cover history. My name is Mark Ford. I don't believe that I introduced myself in my last video. Just thus far, it's kind of just only been friends and people that already know me that have been viewing this, but hopefully this will get out. But for history, I was just going to try to take a modest approach to history and things like that. The problem that, a modest YouTube user like myself has with covering history is there's like an entire channel dedicated to history. Well, it used to be dedicated to history once upon a time, but other than that, you have the Discovery Channel, BBC, even Comedy Central did their like drunk history thing for a little while. So yeah, you've got a pretty saturated market for it. So what I think is going to make mine unique is that I'm going to cover topics that aren't really given a lot of attention on cursory levels, and that will definitely be useful for the viewers to understand these topics. But I'm not going to hit you with cliche things like Hitler and the Nazis or a lot of Civil War topics, even though I would consider myself to be somewhat qualified to talk about Civil War concepts because I grew up in the South and everyone in the South is obsessed with the Civil War. Anyway, so the topic that I chose to talk to you about today is like The Last Samurai, something that I could really just do on the fly and not have to take that much time in researching, and that I already have a good level of knowledge about just because I have a very strong interest in this. Like I talked about before, I was thinking about doing something like the English monarch's right to the French throne or a biography of John Keats. Totally scrap those two ideas. So without further ado, I am going to teach you about an event called Karbala. Karbala is a city in Iraq, but more importantly, it's the site of the martyrdom of Hussain bin Ali, which is the grandson of Muhammad, who is the prophet and founder of Islam. So before going straight into Karbala, talking about what's either called the Battle of Karbala or the tragedy of Karbala, as it's often known in some circles, there has to be a lot of background given to be able to understand this event. So rewinding nearly to the foundations of the modern concept of the religion of Islam is that, because from a Muslim perspective you could trace it all the way back to Adam, but let's go from a history book perspective and say that Islam starts with Muhammad's revelations. So the matter there is that even before Muhammad, Mecca was already a thriving hub of Arabian society, or even Near Eastern society, that it was already a center of trade. This was because of a man named Al-Hajj al-Bazahi, I believe his name was, discovered a gold mine there, so they had like a lot of metals to trade. So they were already and their location 50 kilometers away from the port of Jeddah made them a very strong trading society. As well, they controlled the Kaaba, which was the center of the Arabian pantheon, which is now still an epicenter of Islamic worship today. But Mecca was controlled by a council of tribal chiefs, you might say. And one of the main leaders of this council, in fact, you could say he was the guy pulling all the strings, was a guy named Abu Sufyan. And Abu Sufyan was a fierce opponent to Islam in its genesis. He would even say, out loud, like for a lot of people, it was more of everybody's thinking it, but he was the one just saying it, that his reason for opposing Islam was that it affected the monopoly that Arabia had on the that Mecca had on the Arabian pantheon, and the center of religious worship that was a great source of revenue for the city other than its trading exploits. So, fast forward a little bit, Abu Sufyan ends up converting to Islam under a great deal of pressure. He basically sees that the Muslims have kind of won the game. They're about to march into Mecca unarmed, a total unarmed group is about to march into Mecca, and so he kind of decides if you can't beat them, join them. That's, for me to say that is heavily controversial, but like I said, I'm just going to give my perspective of what history is. If you ask a Sunni person about Abu Sufyan, it's like, oh, he proved his valor in Yarmouk, and that if you ask a Shia person, he would totally agree that Abu Sufyan just kind of converted under pressure. So, moving into the succession of what's called the Rashidun Khalifa, it starts with Abu Bakr and then moves into Omar. And Omar kind of treats Abu Sufyan like a jerk. There's even a story that Omar saw Abu Sufyan walking around while Omar was the caliph, and he told Abu Sufyan, pick up that stick. And then he pointed toward another stick on the road, and pick up that stick too. I need a bundle of sticks. And so Abu Sufyan is walking around picking up sticks for Omar. And Omar says, oh, this is an example of, how Islam has brought you low, or how, you've been brought low from your lofty position whenever you were the head of the council of chiefs in Mecca. So it's kind of a jerk move. But it wasn't all bad as well that Abu Sufyan's sons were instated as governors in the province of Ashams, which is in modern-day Syria. So it wasn't all bad. So you go through going through the line of Rashidun Khalifa. So after Omar, there's Uthman, which Uthman was assassinated by the Khawarij in a very bizarre way. They just they put him under house arrest and they cut off the plumbing. It's a very bizarre way to kill someone, if you ask me. So basically they made him die of thirst because they cut off the plumbing to his house while they put him under house arrest. It's very, very strange from my perspective, at least. So then moving into the next Khalifa, you have a rightly guided Caliph, which is Ali bin Abi Sufyan. Ali bin Abi Sufyan is the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad. He married the daughter of Muhammad, Fatima, and he had two sons named Hussain and Hassan, which I'll get to that later. So, explaining a little bit, before moving into the next part, I need to explain a little bit about who the Khawarij were. The Khawarij were kind of like the Protestants of the early Muslim community because they believed that they could understand the Quran better than the Caliph could, and that they should just independently understand the Quran. They were sort of a solo scriptura movement in the early Muslim community, which was a heresy because, according to many scholars, because whenever Muhammad passed, he said, I leave you with two weights. I leave you with the Quran and I leave you with my Ahlul Bayt. And so Ahlul Bayt literally means the people of the house. And most people today will interpret Ahlul Bayt as being the blood descendants of Muhammad from the line of Fatima and Ali. Others will say that, Ahlul Bayt is the whole of the Muslim community, the whole of the Muslim Ummah, like internationally. Everyone who is a Muslim is Ahlul Bayt. That's a very small minority opinion that holds that. I could get further into the theology of that, but this is a history lecture. So, the Khawarij were the ones responsible for the killing of Uthman. So, after Uthman, Ali ends up becoming the Caliph, and so his first act as Caliph is he causes a bit of a problem where he attempts to fire Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. The son of Abu Sufyan is now the governor of the province of Hashams. So what Muawiyah does to protest this is he goes out in arms against Ali, and Ali responds with arms. And what Muawiyah does is he puts the mushaf, or the book form of the Quran, on the end of his sword, and he raises his sword out with the mushaf at the end, and he says, let the Quran decide between me and you today. And Ali, being the kind of devout, deep philosopher that he was, he quit the field, saying, I cannot raise arms against the Quran. So Muawiyah stays in his position, in his comfortable position in Damascus, and then Ali gets another problem on his hands. Aisha, who is the youngest and probably most controversial wife of Muhammad, considering, one, her young age whenever they married is why it's controversial, and two, because what I'm about to discuss makes her also very controversial as well, decides to raise arms against Ali for not seeking revenge for the killing of Uthman. So what happens with Uthman, or what happens is, what's the result there is called the Battle of Jemalah. It's called the Battle of Jemalah because Jamal is the Arabic word for camels, and so it was a primarily cavalry conflict. Again, going back into it's basically the Khawarij again instigating this conflict, and that you see this because at the end of the battle, one of the companions, a constant companion of Ali, is a man named Kumail. He's revered almost at saint status within the Shia community. Every Thursday night in the Shia community, people will recite what's called Dua Kumail, or the supplication of Kumail. It's a very heart-touching prayer if you ever have a chance to read it. You don't have to be a Muslim or a Shia to understand just how touching the sentiments in that prayer are. But moving on, Ali at the end of the Battle of Jemalah is standing with Kumail, and before there had been an instance where they were walking through the city and they had heard a man reciting the Quran, and Kumail said to Ali, such a beautiful recital of the Quran. And Ali says, in the future, I will remind you of this night. And so at the battle, after the Battle of Jemalah, there was a man laying dead there who had fought against Ali. And Ali says to Kumail, "You see that man there?" He says, "Yes." He says, "You remember that night that you said that there was such a beautiful recital?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "That was the man who was reciting, and he fought against me. They know the Quran, they speak beautiful Quran, but the spirit of the Quran does not leave their throat." So, moving on to further, the Khawarij end up assassinating Ali in the mosque at Kufa in modern Iraq. And again, they're, like I said, the best way to describe the Khawarij is like they were a Protestant movement in early Islam. They're a sola scriptura Protestant movement, as far as you could understand that in a Islamic context. So what results is a power struggle then between Muawiyah, who had already risen in rebellion once against Ali, and Ali's older son Hassan. So Hassan goes and they make gestures back and forth between Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan and Hassan bin Ali that they're going to fight. But Hassan breaks down and calls a truce because Hassan hates to fight. He's a pacifist by nature. And the community, his supporters, shame him for doing this, saying, "This is the shame of the believers." To which Hassan responds, "It's better to suffer shame than to suffer hellfire." And then, so the terms of this treaty is that Hassan will let Muawiyah be the Khalif. But whenever Muawiyah's term is over, or which basically means whenever Muawiyah dies, Hassan's younger brother Hussain will get the Khalifa. So that's the term of the deal. So Muawiyah serves out, he dies, and in the will he breaks his deal. In his will he breaks the deal. He names his son Yazid to be the Khalifa rather than handing it down to Hussein. So Yazid historically is a bad guy. Everybody and their mother who knows about Yazid thinks Yazid was a bad guy. Not just for what's coming up, but for other reasons. He greatly persecuted the Christian community. He was given to sloth. He was just a very bad, negligent, and oppressive leader. So there is a community in Iraq, though, that decides to give their allegiance to Hussein. Hussein does not put his allegiance on Yazid bin Muawiyah. And there's a community in Iraq that decides to put their allegiance on Hussein. So Hussein is pretty skeptical of this, but he goes for it anyway. And he knows that Yazid is not going to like this, but he sets out from Medina anyway. And he sets out from Medina up into Iraq to meet this community that are going to put their allegiance on him. And then Yazid ends up cutting off Hussein at a place known as Karbala. And also, another thing to note is that it's on the day of Ashura. Ashura is the 10th day of Muharram in the Islamic calendar. So, and it really just ends up equaling a massacre. There's about 1,000 people that Yazid sends out against Hussein, and Hussein has about 70 people in his party. So to call it the Battle of Karbala is very much a misnomer. It's just a total wash massacre. And the and it's called the tragedy of Karbala because the party of Hussein, at least according to most of the sources, are dealt with very harshly, are dealt with very badly by the party of Yazid. There's stories about, baby killings, and that there's the another part of the tragedy is that Hussein's son Qasim was married 2 nights before Karbala happened, and actually on the 8th night of Muharram, which is the celebration of Qasim's wedding in the Shia community. They kind of do it in a bit of an Easter sort of. It very much resembles the asperges of an Easter Mass in the ceremony that's done to this day in the Shia community to celebrate the wedding of Qasim. I just remember being a part of that once, and how that was the impression that it left on me. So the two stories that I recall from popular narrations and most likely apocryphal history to do with Karbala, and to just sort of emphasize the injustice viewed around the event is that whenever Hussein was for the most part down and out, they wanted to make sure that Hussein was dead, but he was a fearsome fighter, so nobody wanted to get close enough to really poke him with a stick, sort of thing. So they decided, let's torture his wife, and if he's just sucking sand, no man's going to bear the shame of his wife being tortured in that way, and he'll come at us, and whenever he comes at us, we can shoot him with arrows or more arrows or something like that. And to which Hussein responds, if you're going to be the dogs of hellfire, at least be free in this life. Another narration is that whenever the death blow was given to Hussein, that the man who delivered the death blow took his knife, and he was going to cut off his head. But before he did, he took his knife and he hit his knife, the edge of his knife, against the rocks to dull the blade. And instead of cutting off his head with the knife starting from the soft part of the neck and moving back, he decided that he was going to start from the back and move his way forward. And to which Hussein told this man, why bring this evil on yourself? I'm about to die anyway, so why do you want to take this step? Why do you want to bring such condemnation upon yourself? And the man responded, because I love this life more than the next life, because I love this world more than the world of hereafter. And so again, there's not a lot of this is actually more or less coming from poetry rather than eyewitness accounts or things like that. A lot of it's coming from Persian poetry that really want to embellish the events of Karbala. So Hussein is dead. Then what ends up becoming the aftermath is just a total wash massacre of the descendants of Muhammad, those who are Ahlul Bayt, by Yazid bin Muawiyah. And there's other stories of, two children who were hiding out in a house, and the husband of the woman who was hiding them made an oath that, they if he if the two children told them the truth of their identity, that nothing was going to, happen to them. So they told them the truth, and the husband was lying and decided to turn the children in for a cash reward, and that he basically ends up getting killed as well, sort of poetic justice kind of thing. But there's a lot of stories surrounding the aftermath of Karbala as well. And even to the degree that there's other stories like that that Hussain hid out in the Kaaba, and that there were stones shot at the Kaaba in order to try to kill Hussain. So the thing there, though, is also it is recorded that Yazid, after Karbala, said that Islam is a mulk, or that Islam is a throne, that Islam is a source of authority. So he was saying there that, the regardless of whether the religion's true or not true, it's just a source of authority. And so this is another thing that sort of, is another spit in the face of the tragedy at Karbala. And the reason why to know the story of Karbala is important is this is the actual foundations of the Sunni-Shia split. There were other things that led up to it, such as some people will say that it even began whenever Abu Bakr was chosen over Ali to become the Khalif, that the Battle of Jemalah was a foundation for the split. But no, this is where the split truly happens, where you have a distinguished party who supports Ahlul Bayt, who supports the family of the Prophet, and then there's another party that just goes with the current political system. And this is fundamental to understanding even the modern problems between the Sunni-Shia split, the problems that happened between the Sunni and Shia communities in Iraq in the 2000s, to even understand history in the 20th century, that the phrase penned by Imam al-Jafar, every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala, saying that no matter what time you live in or what place you live in, there's always going to be a Hussain and there's always going to be a Yazid. And no matter what time and place you live in, you need to support the Hussain and oppose the Yazid. This was very common rhetoric used in the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, that the Shah was considered a Yazid, or even that the United States and Britain were considered to be the Yazid, and that the Hussein of the time would have been Ayatollah Khomeini, and that, support Hussein, oppose Yazid, and this martyrdom cult that is very similar to the early Christianity martyrdom cult, that in early Christianity, to unite yourself to the Passion of Christ is the ultimate achievement of a believer, and the ultimate way to unite yourself to the Passion of Christ is to be martyred for the faith. The same holds true in the Shia group, is that uniting yourself to the passion of Yazid, and the best way to unite yourself to the passion of Yazid is to die in a righteous cause, and to live by the principle that Hussein taught: do not be an oppressor, but do not be oppressed. And so this is the lesson of Karbala. I'm trying to teach it the best way I can to what I'm going to assume is a predominantly non-Muslim audience, and I hope that, throwing Arabic vocabulary in there every now and then wasn't too distracting. I tried to, say everything in plain English, like whenever I said they wanted to put their allegiance, what would normally be said is put their bayah, or things like that, that people who are used to dealing in Islamic lectures will understand these things. So what I'm trying to do is bring what would be typically a basic Islamic lecture into a context that non-Muslim laity can understand. And this is actually a very not very well known story, surprisingly, within the Sunni community as well. I have sat in a mosque on Ashura, on a Friday service on Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, and they did not tell this story. And so it's not just non-Muslims that don't know the story. There's a large number of Muslims that don't know this story, and they don't really understand what the split is between themselves and Shia people. They think, oh, it's about intercession and it's about this or that, but politically it comes down to this, to understanding the tragedy of Karbala. There's better lectures on the tragedy of Karbala. This is sort of just the 101 introduction to it, such as Sheikh Muhammad bin Yahya al-Nanawi. He gives a very good lecture, on the tragedy of Karbala for a general audience as well. I believe it can be understood by a general audience. If you want to follow up on that, I'll try to include a link to it below this video. But other than that, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, comment. Any feedback you can give me would be awesome. And I leave that with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For my next lecture, the Wednesday lecture over religion, I was thinking of doing it over either talking about the natural man concept or the myth of work salvation. Thank you, and I'm out.